Alec Baldwin is facing involuntary manslaughter charges for his role in the deadly shooting on the set of his movie Rust. The district attorney in New Mexico, where the tragedy happened, made the announcement a short time ago. Now, as you may recall, Baldwin, who stars in and is the executive producer of the movie, was rehearsing a scene when the gun he was holding discharged, killing cinematographer Halyna Hutchins and wounding director Joel Souza. The movie's armorer, who actually loaded the gun, is also facing involuntary manslaughter charges. Now, the assistant director who handed the gun to Baldwin agreed to plead guilty to negligent use of a deadly weapon. Baldwin's attorney released a statement a short while ago calling the charges, quote, a terrible miscarriage of justice. A lot of ground to cover here, so we're going to turn to criminal defense attorney Rachel Fiset for some answers. Welcome, Rachel. Great to have you with us for your perspective.
Okay, so Rachel, Alec will be facing 2 charges of involuntary manslaughter. My first question is, what does this mean, and why are there 2 charges, and what could he face?
So there are 2 charges that basically cover the same thing, but they've pled them a little differently in the charging because one can include an enhancement for a deadly weapon. So the first charge is an involuntary manslaughter charge, which is criminal negligence on the set that led to the death of Ms. Hutchins. And the second charge is involuntary manslaughter in a lawful act, which has a 5-year enhancement for coming with a deadly weapon. So basically the same thing, but they are taking 2 bites at the apple here.
And are they doing this because the prosecutor is trying to make some type of point?
The prosecutor is levying the most severe charges they can at Alec Baldwin. These are as severe as it gets as it relates to an unintentional action. And I think no one is questioning that this was a horrific accident without intent. So once you have no intent, you go to involuntary manslaughter, and this is as bad as it gets.
Can I just ask, involuntary manslaughter, is it linked to, what is it usually linked to? Horrible accidents?
You usually see involuntary manslaughter in drunk driving accidents. That's what you usually see. So where there's not intent to kill someone, but you've done something so grossly negligent that it wasn't so far out of the realm of possibility that a death or severe injury leading to death would happen. And so that's where you normally see it. And here you're seeing it with a deadly weapon where there's no intent, but a conscious disregard is what they're alleging for the health and human safety of where he was pointing that gun.
And Rachel, you know, he was not just an actor in the film. He was also, as we said, executive producer. So the liability, I guess, goes up the chain with him because he's responsible for hiring the crew, making sure the funds and the budget go to ensuring safety on that set. So the question is, if this case goes to trial, how do you see this then playing out?
I find this very interesting in his role as a producer because there have been findings from the New Mexico State Agency that investigated this as a workplace safety issue, and they found that other producers were in charge of safety on the set, that wasn't Alec Baldwin's job. So his liability as a producer may or may not come into play, but what will come into play is what knowledge he had of prior safety violations. And that might be contained in his text messages or in email correspondence, what he knew and what he had to do, and then the cautions or the behaviors he took as a result of knowing there were safety violations as an actor. It gets a little complicated there.
Yeah.
Are Mr. Baldwin and the armorer going to have separate trials, or is this going to be one trial?
I think that they may request separate trials. It seems unlikely that the judge would grant such a request, given that the way it has been charged is that the jury will have to look at the incident as it happened. And there is a small amount of time that will be covered in that incident. And both Ms. Gutierrez and David Halls, who has already pled guilty, likely to avoid the most severe charges that have been levied, and then Alec Baldwin. So I think this case will likely all be at once.
All right, and so, Rachel, this is interesting because the prosecutors, they say you shouldn't point a gun at someone you're not willing to shoot, but this happens all the time in the movies. How do you differentiate between pointing a gun when the cameras are rolling versus when the cameras are off in rehearsals?
I mean, I think you are hitting on Alec Baldwin's defense, which is everybody on that set knew I was going to point a gun at the camera. In fact, they asked me to do that. And I did that thinking this gun was not loaded. I was told it was a cold gun. And those are going to be the defenses that come up. He's going to point the finger at Dave Halls, likely at the armorer, that it was their responsibility to make sure that gun wasn't loaded, and he was reasonable in relying on the assurances that it was not loaded.
So then, Rachel, how does the fact that the assistant director agreed to plead guilty to, does that affect Alex's case going forward if he's already, done that?
It does affect his case going forward. So they got him to plead guilty so that he can now testify freely in that trial without making himself in peril based on his admissions. So you are going to hear from Dave Halls, likely as a term of his plea agreement, testifying against Alec Baldwin and against the armorer.
Okay.
Now, Rachel, the family, though, Matt Hutchins, Halyna's widow, has settled with Alec Baldwin and the Rust crew. And in fact, they were scheduled to resume production on the film, I believe, this month. They were going to return to LA to shoot the rest of it. But now that, of course, that remains to be seen what happens to the film. And Matt Hutchins was going to be given the title of EP on the movie. So the question is, though, if this family settlement already happened, does this in any way affect what happens legally to Alec Baldwin and to the rest of the crew who are being implicated in the criminal case?
It's an interesting question, and oftentimes a civil settlement like that may affect how the prosecutors proceed. Here, it appears that it has not affected them. They are going forward with the victim's family having settled a civil suit. We had a statement from her family this morning, which did say they supported the charges against Alec Baldwin. And there may be evidence that didn't come out in the civil suit that is now clearer, that may put him more at fault. These are things we don't yet know, but it appears that the prosecutors do still have the support of the family in bringing these charges.
But you talked about, Rachel, you talked about in Akbar's question what could be Alec Baldwin's defense, but I don't think his interviews did him any favors. How will that play in this?
His interviews likely did him no favors, and it's very hard when celebrities and public figures are charged with crimes or something they don't feel they should be blamed for. And as a public figure, I think it's hard for them to bite their tongue and kind of take it because they want to clear their name in public opinion. And Alec Baldwin did a lot of that. And these interviews could come back to hurt him if things that he said in them turn out not to be true. He went into some factual elements in those interviews that the prosecutor may use to reduce his credibility at a jury trial.
And I just have to reiterate that the statement from the attorney, from Alec Baldwin's attorney, was that he calls this a terrible miscarriage of justice, and that he is vowing that Alec Baldwin, they will fight this and they will win. Do you see this, Rachel, likely to go to trial, or is a settlement possibility something that might be entertained?
So my guess is that the last 3 months have been spent attempting to come to an agreement with the prosecutors. Likely, Alec Baldwin's defense team was attempting to have the case dismissed, not charged at all, and clearly that is not what happened. So I actually do see this going to trial. I don't think he's probably willing to take a plea on anything. You'll see Dave Halls did take a plea to a much lesser offense. He's getting 6 months probation and a fine. That same crime may or may not have been offered to Alec Baldwin, and he obviously did not take it. They did not come to an agreement. I think the defense team for both parties here are looking to clear their names in their entirety and believe they have good defenses to the charges.
If you were representing Mr. Baldwin, would you suggest he take the stand?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. And I think you can't answer that question until you have all of the evidence. And some of the evidence we don't know, which I think would be really interesting to know, would be what do his text messages say? What kind of knowledge did he have of other safety issues on the set? What kind of gun training did he do or refuse to do? And did he then follow the precautions that were reasonable given that training? Now, if the answers to that are fairly good for him, I think in a big name celebrity like this, it might be helpful for him to take the stand if he has nothing to hide. And taking the stand in a criminal case is generally not recommended, but in this type of incident where intent is not a question, it may be very helpful for him.
Well, it is going to be very interesting to watch and see where this one goes. Rachel Fiset, thank you so much for giving us such excellent perspective. Really appreciate it. We'll be right back.